The snow had been falling since morning, and by the time the light began to fade, the whole world seemed wrapped in a thick white blanket. Elara pulled her worn cloak tighter around her shoulders and pushed forward through the drifts, her basket of dried herbs pressed against her side. She had lived at the frozen edge of the northern lands for 2 winters now, ever since the village had sent her away to live alone in the old cottage past the tree line. They had called her strange for talking to plants and for healing sick animals no one else cared about. She had learned not to mind. The quiet suited her, and the mountains, for all their cold, had never once been cruel to her. But that evening, the mountains felt different. The wind carried a sound she had never heard before, thin and broken, almost swallowed by the storm. She stopped walking and listened. It came again, a small cry, weak and desperate. Her heart tightened. Somewhere out in the freezing dark, something was suffering. Most people would have hurried home. The forest near her cottage belonged to the wolves of Frostpeak, and everyone in the valley feared them. Stories were told around every fire about their golden eyes and their silent hunts. Children were warned never to wander past the pines. But Elara had never been able to walk away from a creature in pain, no matter how afraid she was. She followed the sound, stumbling through the snow until she reached a fallen pine tree, its great trunk half buried in white. There, beneath the sheltering branches, lay a wolf pup. It was tiny, no bigger than a loaf of bread, with a coat of soft silver fur now matted and dark with blood. Its side had been torn, and its little chest rose and fell in shallow, trembling breaths. It was dying. Elara knew it the moment she saw it. Another hour in the cold, and the small life would flicker out entirely. She knelt in the snow and reached out slowly. The pup opened its eyes, and she caught her breath. They were gold, deep and clear, and there was something in them she could not name, something older and wiser than any animal she had ever met. The pup did not snap or growl. It only looked at her, as if asking whether she meant it harm. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. "I promise." She gathered the pup gently into her arms, tucking it inside her cloak against the warmth of her own body. Then she turned and hurried home as fast as the deep snow would allow, whispering soft words the whole way, telling the little one to hold on, to stay with her just a little longer. By the time she reached her cottage, her hands were numb and her legs ached, but the pup was still breathing. She laid it on a blanket beside the fire and set to work. She had spent years learning which herbs could stop bleeding and which could ease pain and fight sickness. She cleaned the wound with warm water, packed it carefully with a paste of mountain leaves and honey, and wrapped it in soft cloth. Then she warmed a little broth and, drop by drop, coaxed it past the pup's lips. That night she did not sleep. She sat beside the fire and held the small creature close, feeling its heartbeat flutter against her palm. Every time its breathing grew shallow, she rubbed its fur and spoke to it softly, refusing to let it slip away. Dawn came pale and grey, and the pup was still alive. The days that followed were slow and tender. The pup was too weak to move at first, so Elara fed it by hand and kept it warm, and changed its bandages with the greatest care. On the second day, it lifted its head. On the third, it drank broth on its own, and thumped its tail weakly against the blanket. Something in her chest that had been closed for a long time began to open again. She had been alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be needed. "I think I'll call you Ash," she told the pup, smiling, "because I found you grey as ashes, and now you're coming back to life." The pup's golden eyes brightened, and she could have sworn it understood her. As Ash grew stronger, Elara noticed strange things about her small guest. It was far too clever for an ordinary animal. It seemed to know when she was sad, and would press its nose against her hand. It watched her hands as she worked her herbs, as though it were studying them. And sometimes, when the firelight caught its eyes just so, they looked less like the eyes of a beast, and more like the eyes of a person trapped somewhere deep inside. She told herself she was imagining it. She had spent too long alone, and her mind was making stories out of shadows. But the feeling would not leave her. 4 mornings after she had found the pup, Elara woke to find the fire burned low, and the room strangely quiet. She reached for the warm shape that had been sleeping beside her every night, but the blanket was empty. Her heart lurched. She sat up quickly, calling Ash's name, and then she froze. Where the pup had been, there now lay a young man. He was wrapped in her spare blankets, his dark hair falling across a pale face, and along his side, in exactly the place where the pup had been wounded, ran a healing scar. His eyes opened, and they were gold, the same clear gold she had come to know so well. Ilara scrambled back against the wall, her mind spinning. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Where is my pup? What have you done?" The young man raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and rough, as though he had not used it in a long while. "Please," he said, "do not be afraid. I am the pup. I am Ash." Ilara shook her head. It was impossible. And yet, deep down, she had known all along that there was something more to the small creature she had saved. "I am not an ordinary wolf," the young man went on gently. "My people are the Frost Peak Pack. We can take two forms, the shape of the wolf and the shape of a human. I am the son of our Alpha King, the heir to the pack, but there are those who did not wish me to live to take my father's place. They set upon me, wounded me, and cast a curse to lock me in my weakest form, the form of a helpless pup. They left me in the snow to die." He looked at her then, and his golden eyes were full of something she could not quite believe. "The curse held me as long as I was near death. But your kindness, your care, healing me not because you wanted anything, but simply because you could not bear to let me suffer, that broke it. You gave me back my life, and my true shape with it." Ilara pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. It was too strange to be true, and yet she could not deny the scar on his side, the color of his eyes, the way he looked at her, exactly as the pup had looked at her. Before she could find her words, a low sound rose outside the cottage. Ilara went to the window and looked out, and her breath caught in her throat. The clearing around her home was full of wolves. They stood silent in the snow, dozens of them, their coats every shade from white to deepest grey, their eyes glowing gold in the pale morning light. They did not move, they did not growl, they only watched the cottage, waiting. "They have found me," Ash said softly, rising to his feet. He wrapped a blanket around himself and stood tall, despite the weakness still in his limbs. "My pack has been searching for me since the night I vanished. They believed me lost forever." Fear coiled tight in Ilara's stomach. She was a human alone at the edge of the world, and outside stood a whole pack of the creatures her village had feared her entire life. What would they do to her? What would they think of the woman who had kept their heir in her cottage? "Stay behind me," Ash told her, and there was a gentleness in the command. "No harm will come to you, I give you my word." The cottage door opened, though no one had touched it, and the cold air rushed in. Through the snow strode a figure taller and broader than all the wolves around him. He wore a long cloak lined with silver fur, and a circlet of dark iron rested upon his brow. His face was stern and weathered, marked by years of hard winters and harder choices, and his eyes were the deepest gold of all. Power seemed to move around him like the wind itself. This, Ilara knew at once, was the Alpha King. The great wolves parted before him as he crossed the clearing. When his gaze fell upon the young man in the doorway, his stern face broke, and for a moment he looked like nothing more than a father who had feared he lost his child. "My son," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "You live." "I live, father," Ash answered. "And I live only because of her." The Alpha King turned his golden eyes upon Ilara, and she felt the full weight of his attention settle on her like a mountain. She wanted to shrink away, to hide, but she made herself stand still and meet his gaze. She had done nothing wrong. She had only shown kindness. "You are the one who found my son dying in the snow," the king said. It was not a question. "I am," Ilara answered, and her voice trembled only a little. "I could not leave him to die. I would have done the same for any creature." "You did not know what he was." "No," she admitted. "I only knew he was hurt and afraid, and that he needed help." For a long moment, the Alpha King said nothing. The whole clearing was silent, the wolves and the wind and the falling snow all seeming to hold their breath. Then the king did something that made every wolf around him lower their heads in wonder. He knelt. There in the snow, before the door of a humble cottage, the ruler of the entire northern pack lowered himself to one knee before a lone human woman. His head bowed, and his voice, when he spoke, carried across the clearing for all to hear. "By the oldest law of our people," he said, "one who saves the blood of the crown is owed a debt beyond measure. You have given back to me my son and my heir, the future of our entire pack. There is no gift I could offer that would ever equal what you have given, and so I kneel, as a king and as a father, to honor you." Ilara stared, hardly able to breathe. All around the clearing, the wolves knelt with their king, their golden eyes turned toward her, the exiled woman whom her own village had cast aside. She, who had been told all her life that she was strange and unwanted, now stood before a court of the north, and they bowed to her. Tears filled her eyes. "Please," she said, "I did not do it for a reward. I only did what my heart told me was right." "I know," the Alpha King said, rising slowly to his feet. "That is exactly why you are worthy of it." He studied her with a new kind of respect. "You will not spend another winter alone at the edge of the world, cast out and forgotten. From this day, you are under the protection of the Frostpeak Pack. You will want for nothing. You will always have a home among us, if you wish it." Then Ash stepped forward, and there was something in his face beyond gratitude, something soft and warm that made Ilara's heart beat faster. "When I was a pup," he said quietly, "you held me through the coldest nights so I would not be afraid. You gave me your food and your warmth and your care, and you asked for nothing in return. I have traveled far and met many people, but never one with a heart like yours." He paused, and his golden eyes searched hers. "My people wait a very long time to find the one who is meant to walk beside them. I believe, now, that I have found mine." Ilara's breath caught. She thought of the long, lonely winters, the empty cottage, the silence she had told herself she did not mind. And she thought of the small, warm creature that had needed her, that had looked at her as though she were the whole world, and how it had felt to be needed and to belong. The Alpha King watched them both, and a rare smile touched his stern face. "The choice is yours, child," he said to her. "The debt we owe stands whether you take it or not, but my son does not offer his heart lightly, and I have not seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Outside, the storm had finally passed. The first true light of dawn broke over the mountains, spilling gold across the endless snow, until the whole world seemed to glow. The wolves rose from their boughs and stood tall, waiting, and the air was filled with a sense of something beginning. Ilara looked at Ash, at the young man who had once been a dying pup in her arms, and she saw in his golden eyes the same trust and warmth she had loved from the very first night. She thought of all the years she had believed she was meant to be alone. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps every cold and lonely winter had been leading her here, to this dawn, to this clearing, to this choice. Slowly, she reached out her hand. Ash took it, and his fingers were warm around hers. The wolves lifted their voices then, a long clear song that rose over the mountains and echoed through the shining snow, welcoming her not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as one of their own. And as the sun climbed higher, and the whole snowy court turned toward her with golden eyes full of respect and joy, Ilara understood at last that the kindness she had given so freely, expecting nothing, had come back to her 1,000 times over. She had set out that night to save a dying pup. By dawn, she had found a family, a future, and a place where she would always, forever, belong.